We've had the Wii presentation. This is something different. This isn't for weebs. This is for mid-2000s children who grew up watching these movies, or 2020 adults who have just discovered them, or potentially people that have never seen a Barbie movie in their life. This is for everyone. This is information that we all need to see. Now, you could be asking me, Melo, this isn't a Barbie movie on screen. This isn't relevant, surely, to a movie about magic or Pegasuses or Barbie. And I would like to answer your very interesting question with, this roller skate is incredibly relevant. 1, because a lot of this movie centers around skating, not roller skating, but ice skating. 2, because I like these skates, and I wanted to show you them. I think they're really cool, they're just kind of expensive. And 3, the colour scheme of these roller skates matches the aesthetic of this Barbie film so perfectly that I would almost believe that Rookie knew what they were doing. So with that in mind, let me cover some disclaimers before we really jump into it. Very much like Brian David Gilbert's Poke Rap, there will be no audience participation. This is serious, okay? You're about to be educated. We are taking a very sincere, a deep dive, you could say, into some of the great mysteries of this early 2000s Barbie movie. Bearing that in mind, there will be spoilers. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to just straight up lay out the plot of the movie like I sort of did for Detective Conan, but I am going to be discussing the characters, the villain, the sort of resolutions. It's not going to be a handholdy A to Z, but it is, you know, I'm going to cover a lot of stuff. But also, I love this movie. It's not going to look like it, because I'm going to eviscerate it to the ground, but I really do think this is a very good film. I think it is heartwarming. I think it is enjoyable to watch. The animation is sucky, but I think we just need to get through that. So bearing that in mind, this is the terrifying implications of Barbie and the Magic of Pegasus. Now you're asking me, there's a bottom right, aka here. Strange that you've put this in such a small font as if you didn't want us to see it, and yet we've seen it. Answer me, Alana Lester and Cliff Ruby, you cowards. Who are they? Well, I'll answer you. According to Wikipedia, Alana Lester and Cliff Ruby are the writers of this movie. Now, I don't know a lot about movie production. I'm not really sure who is responsible for the decisions, such as the characters, the plot, the idea of it all, but I'm willing to bet that it's the writers more so than the director or the producer. So Greg, Luke, and Jessica, they escape my ire. Alana and Cliff, however, do not. I also found out from this wiki that Brie Larson, yes, the Brie Larson, recorded the song for this movie. And please listen to it if you have the time after this. Please listen. It's so much. It's so 2005. Like, I feel like I'm watching Kelly Clarkson at the end of Princess Diaries and wearing jelly shoes, and I have clip-on hair extensions and blue eyeshadow, and I'm having a great time being 4. But that's sort of background on the movie. I'm gonna discuss the movie in terms of the problems I've found with it, one by one. And I'm gonna do it in order of sort of how they show up in the movie, but also to some degree how much of a problem I think they are. And that's why we're gonna begin with Annika. Now, Annika is the main character of this movie, and weirdly, she's the least of my problems, despite the fact that everything centers around her. So here are some facts. On her 16th or 17th birthday, the movie begins with a crusty wizard trying to forcibly marry her. See, this is weird. Why don't we know her exact birthday? It is so central to the plot that they stress her birthday near constantly in the first 15 minutes, and yet at no point does anyone explicitly say, it's her 16th birthday, or it's her 17th birthday. It's a small detail, but it really does matter. She loves to ice skate. That's normal, actually. That's not a problem. But when she's ice skating at the beginning of the movie, she kidnaps a bear she just finds. Look at this bear. It's not happy. She takes it out of its natural environment, the environment that it is established a life in, that it's safe in, and she just picks it up and is like, this is mine now, and just takes it. That's such a lack of care for animals. Later on in the movie, she is buried under an avalanche by the villain, and we don't know how long she is under that ice, but she's there for long enough that she should be dead. And yet, the guy in this movie, Aiden, just claws her out with his bare hands, and they take her away, and she's unconscious for an hour or so, and then she just wakes up, is slightly dizzy, and 10 minutes later is ice skating through a murder maze. Her bounce back ability is too much. It's almost inhuman. She's also really smug. about her ability to ice skate better than Aiden in the murder maze I mentioned earlier. But here's the thing. This murder maze has got, like, sheer drops and bits of ice so thin that they have to skate on one blade. If he was any less good at ice skating than he is, which is what she suspects, by the way, he wouldn't survive this situation. It isn't just a haha, he's not good at ice skating, mightn't trip and fall. He would die. He would fall into the ocean and he would die. So this face that she makes after she does a sheer drop and she's looking back to see if he made it, that isn't just a harmless, smug, banterous interaction. That is pure evil. That is malevolence. She does not care about his life. This poor man, he tries his best, and yet this is how she repays him. I have other issues with her. The main one is that she's almost too willing to do shit. Like, bad stuff happens to her, and she just doesn't take any time to process it. Here are some pictures of her facial reactions after events in this movie. Like, a flying horse takes her to a floating castle in the sky. Cool, she doesn't care. She finds out this horse is actually her sister who was cursed by Wenlock 16 or 17 years ago. Again, fine. No reaction. She escapes a soup giant and her ribbon turns into a mystical pink wand. How very normal and cool and nice. She does not react or process or care. She just moves on to the next thing. And combined, her lack of empathy for animals and humans, her willingness to just dive into dangerous situations, her lack of awareness for her surroundings, it leads me to one conclusion. Very much like Danny Zuko in the finale of Grease, she is experiencing a break from reality. She doesn't understand the circumstances she's facing. She's dissociated so completely that all bad news means nothing to her. She doesn't think this is reality. She's just going along with things, step after step, risking her life, risking others. And this is the least of my problems. The next of my problems is Shiver. This fucking bear. So I have some evidence suggesting that Shiver, this bear in the movie, is immortal, and it sort of begins with the things that she can survive. So she can survive being impaled by ice skates again during the beginning of the movie. She falls down a flight of 14 stairs and also survives. She drops into this pit that becomes a drop slide. The shock of that alone would kill me. She is then half cooked into a stew made of just carrots. It's just carrots. And the thing is, she's a polar bear. Polar bears are adapted to have such good insulation that actually, with very small increases in temperature, they overheat really easily. So being in this pot, this heating pot for a stew somehow made of carrots, that's hot for a human. For a polar bear? This would destroy her. She would not be able to survive this. And yet she does. She survives the entire movie. So is she an immortal bear, as I'm proposing, or perhaps is there evidence that she's something more sinister, that she could be something else? So, evidence against her being an immortal bear? She hates the cold. Very weird for a polar bear. She can speak English. Admittedly, it's only the words sparkle, shiver, and sparkle wand, but she can pick up words. Like, she picks up wand after she's learned sparkle. She's easily distracted by shiny things like jewellery. She also shows romantic interest in this human man. Now, again, it's kind of coded as more of a childish infatuation, but she shows like this complex emotion. She also displays incredible greed and hubris. Later on in the movie, her desire for shiny objects almost dooms the life of her and her companions. So, what is the conclusion of all this? My conclusion is that she's a baby in a fursuit. Now, you might be thinking this is clearly not a baby Mello, this is clearly a polar bear. But I want you to look closely. Look at her big blue eyes. Look at her incredibly luscious eyelashes, almost as if they have mascara painted on them. Now look at her incredibly flat and human teeth, and then her behaviour, her hatred of the cold, her ability to learn English, her distraction by shiny things, her wanting things, everything is hers, mine, you could say, and her childish crush on this human man, and it all just comes together. This is either an immortal bear or a baby in a fursuit, and nothing in between. Which leads me to problem number 3. The villain of this movie. In the middle, Wenlock. On the left, his pet griffin. And on the right, his 3 wives, or as I call them, Wenlock and the boys. So there's a couple of fun facts about Wenlock. He's a cool dude. He will only accept brides of age 16 plus. I mean, what a king, honestly. He really said age of consent. He has 3 ex-wives that he turned into trolls because they annoyed him, which just has very big, I hate my wife energy. He gives up, though, at the slightest inconvenience. Like, things go slightly wrong, and he completely gives up, but only after enacting, like, very specific revenge. So he tries to marry a 16-year-old, she says no, he turns her into a horse. He tries to marry another 16-year-old, she says no, he turns her entire kingdom to stone and gives her a 3-day time limit to say yes. 2 days into that, he decides he's bored with her and tries to kill her with an avalanche. He turns, like, a shopkeeper into a doormat, which is weirdly traumatic. Like, you see the shopkeeper, like, banging on the bars of this doormat, and you don't see him freed from the doormat. You're only left to assume that he is, but he does have the best lines, which we'll get into later. He also has this pet griffin, and it doesn't have a name. It's not even, like, referenced to. The only things we know about it is that it has claws, it's tall, and it's actually a cat. And if it wasn't for the fact that the griffin is so important in terms of getting characters to and from places, I would sincerely believe that this griffin was not in the script. They didn't write the griffin in. The animators were just like, this villain isn't interesting enough, let's give him a giant cat. But all of the issues with Wenlock really are consolidated in his age. And we can learn a lot of things about his age from his wives, so we have to make a few assumptions here. If we assume that he was 16 for his first marriage, bearing in mind that he cares so much about consent, you would assume he waited till he was 16. And then he stayed married to each of his wives for an undisclosed amount of time. We're going to assume a year. I think that's a good estimate. We can also assume that he waited 16 years between wives, because this is what he did between Brietta and Annika. His process seems to be pick a baby, wait for it to hit 16, and then marry it for a year, and then turn it into a troll and start again. So if you add this up, this is 5 lots of 16 years, plus an extra 3, at a minimum. He is 83 years old. If you go with the upper estimate of 17 for the ages of people, he's 88. This is weird, right? Like, this is a Barbie movie about an 83-year-old man trying to marry 2 16-year-olds. There should be more trauma associated with this, and yet the movie does not cover it. And this puts me in, like, a really high-stress situation, so I think we need a break. This break is maybe a good time to just have a little look at some of the iconic quotes from this movie. Maybe you've not seen it in a while, maybe you've never seen it, and just have a look at these. I mean, yeah, a personal favourite of mine is definitely I Think That Don't. But there is something truly beautiful about Sparkle Sparkle from Fursuit Baby Shiver. I do feel quite rejuvenated from that break. I was at quite a high in terms of my energy, and I think I've brought myself to where I needed to be to move on to one of the bigger problems in this movie. Problem number 4. The Cloud Kingdom and its Cloud Queen. So, hey, just a small question. Just something little that's been nagging me. What the fuck is the Cloud Kingdom? No, seriously, what the fuck is it? Because it floats in the sky. It has no discernible boundaries. Like, where does it begin and end? Is the Cloud Queen the queen of this castle? Like, exclusively the land of the castle? Or does the, kingdom exist over the whole sky? You're telling me that one queen has dominion over the whole sky? It also is this castle of unnecessarily gigantic proportions. No one here is bigger than, 5 foot, presumably. Everyone is, a normal size. And yet this castle is almost like it was built for giants. And then, for some reason, has an outdoor ice rink. There is a weird obsession with ice in this kingdom. And even more horrifying than this, even more disturbing than the kingdom itself, is the Cloud Kingdom people. There's a quote from Cloud Princess Blush. "We've never had a real person here before. What the fuck does this mean? Because you look like a person, Blush. You look like a person, Cloud Queen Rayla and the Cloud Princesses. So if you're not real people, what are you?" And to answer this question, I turn to the Barbie Wikipedia. Barbie Wiki suggests that the Cloud Kingdom's inhabitants are Pegasi, and that Cloud Queen Rayla rules over the Pegasi, and yet we only see a few Pegasuses. We only see 3 or 4 over the course of the whole movie. So why does Rayla, presumably a real person, rule over Pegasi? I think there's only one conclusion from all of this. The reason that no real people live here is because everyone who lives here is a shape-shifting Pegasus. She is the ruler of the Pegasi because she is a Pegasi, and yet at no point does she use this ability to her advantage. She could transform into a Pegasus and potentially help get people from place to place, and yet she stays in her kingdom. Why? If she has dominion over the whole sky, why doesn't she use that power for good? Now, problem number 5 is quite small compared to questioning a whole cloud kingdom, but it does have vast implications for this movie's universe as a whole. So, the ogre scene. I would like to talk about the ogre scene. The ogre scene is this brief portion of the movie where Barbie sort of shows off her ability to be smart and a bit ruthless, and she's trapped in this stew. Remember the stew from earlier with Shiver, the fursuit baby? The thing is, this stew is in this giant's house, in this giant's forest. Now, this giant is shown to have one skill and one skill only, and that is cooking soups out of carrots. So are you telling me that he built his house? Like, the woodwork, the arches in this house are actually quite beautiful. The windows are quite stunning. And you're telling me that this man who knows how to cook carrots and chain himself to walls, you're telling me he built an entire house? It just doesn't add up. There's got to be more of him, surely. There's got to be like this whole culture of ogre people that can build houses and can farm and that live in this giant forest. But it just doesn't add up. Why is there this big man and these big ogres that live in these big houses in this big forest? We need to remember Cloud Kingdom. Cloud Kingdom built so big as if it were built for giants. So is this a big man in a big house in a big forest? No. It's a small Barbie. This is a Thumbelina type situation we have here, people. It's not that the locations are big. Annika and the people in this movie are just small. Everyone is living in these tiny settlements next to these giant mountains because they aren't safe. Because they are the equivalent of mice in this universe. They aren't the species that is powerful in this world because they are tiny. And that applies to everything we've talked about so far. All of these Pegasi, again, the size of tiny dolls. So this small scene in the middle of the movie that could mean nothing actually means that everything we've known is false. And that brings us to my main issue with this movie. This fucking horse girl, Brietta. The main reason I wanted to make this presentation is because of Brietta. There is too much that she leaves unanswered. She encompasses all of my problems with this movie, starting with the timeline. So the plot of this movie begins on Brietta's birthday. She's born 16 or 17 years later. Again, we're going to go with the lower estimate of 16. When Locke tries to marry her, she says no, she's turned into a horse. After an undisclosed but reasonably short amount of time later, she leaves for Cloud Kingdom. She stays in Cloud Kingdom until Annika's 16th or 17th birthday, at which point she returns. She takes Annika, the plot of the movie begins, and 2 days later, she returns to her body. So here's the thing. Annika didn't remember Brietta. And you could explain this as being your sister is kidnapped when you were like 5 or 6, and that's kind of traumatic. Except Annika wasn't 5 or 6 when Brietta was taken. No. Brietta explains that when Annika was born, their parents moved to the farthest corner of the kingdom because they were afraid that Wenlock would come for her as they did Brietta. This means that Annika was born after the horse transformation. Annika was born at least 9 months after Brietta's 16th birthday. So when you add up the timeline, you have a 16-year gap, followed by maybe a couple months gap, a 9-month gap, followed by a 16-year gap again, and then 2 days. How old does that make Brietta? Well, if you've been following the math along with me, at a minimum, Brietta is 32 with a 16-year-old sibling. Now look at this woman. Look at her, and then look me dead in the eye, and tell me she's 32. Tell me, you can't do it. Where are her wrinkles? Why does she look younger than Annika? I'll tell you the truth now. I got a bit unnecessarily angry about that, because that's not really my problem. I was baiting you a little bit. I am willing to accept that being a horse for 16 or 17 years kind of freezes your physical aging. I'm okay with that. I'm not even really going to touch on the fact that this has, like, vast implications for her life. Like, Can you imagine trying to form meaningful connections with people your own age when you look about 16 years younger? So does she try and make friends with people that are 16, knowing that there's this big gap in maturity between them? Or does she try and make friends with people that are 32, knowing that they might not be able to take her seriously, considering she looks so young? I'm even fine with the fact that she lived as a horse for 16 years, because the lifespan of a horse is actually quite long. And if we assume that when she got turned into a horse, that was the beginning of her life, then she was only dipping into that. But this lifespan issue kind of crops up again. What is her lifespan? Because the lifespan of a human is 79 years, but what is her body thinking it is? Like, does her body think she's a horse? How long is she expected to live? Because if her body thinks she's a horse, she's got maybe 10 years left. And if her body thinks she's a human, well, that raises even more questions. Is her body 16 or is it 32? Because if it's 16, she has about 60 years left. She's gained 32 years of life. Now, who were her friends before she was turned into a horse? Because she's going to outlive all of them by 32 years. Everyone that she had connections with, her parents, her friends, her extended family, she is going to outlive them by much more than she was supposed to. This is tragic. This is a tragedy. This has substantial knock-on effects to her life. It's not just a silly woman-horse-woman transformation. No, it has long-reaching implications on how she is supposed to form connections in this new world that she has just gained back as a human. And that's not even talking about the biology. If you ignore the wings and the fact that she's purple, she is very much a normal horse. I'd like you to imagine physically transforming into a horse. Your bones would change shape, you would gain some, you would lose some, your organs would massively expand. This would be painful, it would be traumatic, and then you'd have to learn to walk on 4 legs all over again. You'd have to learn how to fly, specifically in this case, and there are other issues with horse biology. Horses can't see the way that we can. Their eyes are on the sides of their heads, which basically means that they can see almost 360 degrees. They have a much wider field of vision. Also, their vision is more similar to a person with red-green colour blindness than a person with full vision. And also their depth perception is absolutely fucked. It's basically non-existent. So her skills as a human and a horse are massively different and difficult to process switching between. Like, look at this. As a horse, she has a near 360 visual field, but with shitty depth perception. She's so much faster, she can fly, she can talk with other Pegasi, she can talk with other animals, and she can sleep standing up, but she can't throw up or she will die. That is a fact about horses. And as a human, her visual field is reduced, but the colour vision, the depth perception is increased. She's slower, she can't fly. She can't talk with other Pegasi or other animals, but she can throw up safely. So, technically, a win, and this would be really hard to adjust to. She's gotten used to living as a horse. It's been 16 or 17 years. She's very much ingrained in this horse lifestyle. Turning into a human wouldn't just be becoming a human. It would be gaining full colour vision. It would be gaining depth perception. It would be gaining thumbs and arms and entire limbs. Your bones would shrink, your organs would shrink, and you would now have to learn how to walk again on 2 legs. She wouldn't be able to walk straight away. She wouldn't be able to see. She would collapse upon the floor like an infant and she would cry. And yet the movie doesn't cover this. The movie pretends that horse-human transformation would be incredibly easy, and it would not. Both transformations would be incredibly overwhelming. But let's focus on these skills before we end. As a horse, Brietta learns that all animals have this universal form of communication, seeing as she can talk with other Pegasi and other animals and she can have those interactions. She is even shown to have formed friendships with these horses. She asks them when she turns back into a human if they recognise her, and they kind of answer. They kind of suggest that they do. So she knows now that all animals on this planet have a complex sentience, they can form emotional bonds, and they can understand human speech. What is she supposed to do with this information? Is she supposed to keep it to herself? What are the moral implications of that? Is it her duty to share this with the world and become a champion of rights for animals? If she does share it with the world, how does the world react? Do they brand her as a crazy person and a witch? Or do they believe her? And if they do believe her, Do they have this switch in humanity from eating meat to becoming vegetarian? And if they don't all become vegetarian, do animal rights activists suddenly become incredibly more aggressive, knowing that they have evidence that animals definitely 100% are incredibly complex thinking beings? Does this universe experience a war between animal rights activists and whatever you call someone that isn't an animal rights activist? Is the sequel to Barbie and the Magic of Pegasus just a full-on battle of morals between animals and man? Like, this is important, and yet the movie completely brushes over the implications of this like it doesn't matter. So in conclusion, this movie may look harmless, but there are some terrifying implications to the characters, the plot, the setting. The first terrifying implication is that Annika is disconnected from her own reality. Shiver is either an immortal bear or a baby. Wenlock is aged between 83 and 88 years old. The inhabitants of Cloud Kingdom are all shape-shifting Pegasi. People in this universe are small, perhaps even rat-sized, and Brietta is a 32-year-old animal rights activist. And with that, I hope I've answered most of your questions about this movie, if not all. Thank you very much for watching.